All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into a really fascinating historical puzzle, using W. Schmidt's groundbreaking work, The Origin and Growth of Religion, to basically flip a century-old story completely on its head.
So how did religion really start? I mean, for more than a century, scientists and thinkers were pretty sure they had it all figured out. The story seemed simple, it seemed logical, it seemed solved. But, as we're about to find out, the real story was hiding in plain sight the whole time. It was just being told in the wrong order. Okay, so let's get right into it. The idea that really dominated the 19th century was this thing called progressivist evolutionism. And you got to understand, this was a huge idea. It wasn't just about religion. It shaped how scholars saw, well, pretty much everything. This was the era of Darwin, and that kind of thinking was just everywhere. So this theory kind of rode that wave, and it was all built on one simple and what seemed like a really logical assumption. If something is simple, it must also be ancient. It just made sense that human belief must have started with basic, kind of crude ideas, and then slowly, progressively became more complex and refined over time. So what did that look like? Well, they pictured it as this clean, straight ladder of progress. Right at the bottom, the very first step, you've got humanity starting with stuff like primitive magic, worshiping random objects, what they called fetishism. Then you take a step up to animism, believing the world is full of spirits. Another step up and you get polytheism, with a whole family of gods. And then finally, at the very, very top of the ladder, the grand finale, you get monotheism, the belief in one single god. Now, this wasn't just some fringe theory. We're talking about a massive intellectual project. For decades, brilliant scholars all over Europe poured their entire careers into proving this ladder was real. They were on a mission to find the evidence for every single rung. And you can actually watch this idea build step by step. It starts way back in 1760 with de Brosses and his theory of fetishism. Then, fast forward a century, and E.B. Tylor comes along and really cements animism as the foundation. Then you've got Herbert Spencer adding his ghost theory of ancestor worship. And then folks like Fraser throw in totemism and magic for good measure. See what's happening? Every new theory just seemed to lock another piece of the puzzle into place, making the whole ladder feel more and more solid. And just like that, it seemed like the case was closed. The scientific world was patting itself on the back. They believed they had completely mapped the journey of human belief, from its simplest origins to its complex present. The story was solved. Or so they thought. But then, there's always a but then, isn't there? A scholar named Andrew Lang was looking at the data from the world's most so-called primitive peoples. The ones who were supposed to be stuck on that very bottom rung of the ladder. And he found something. Something that just didn't fit. At all. What he found was, honestly, a bombshell. These ancient cultures, the ones they were calling savages, people in Australia, parts of Africa, the Americas, they had a belief in a single supreme being, a creator god, one who was good and moral. Now think about that ladder. This was impossible. How could the highest form of religion, monotheism, be sitting right there at the very lowest stage of cultural development? It made no sense. Look, this wasn't just some small detail they could sweep under the rug. This was a direct hit. The discovery of these high gods in the world's oldest cultures didn't just break a rung on the ladder. It threatened to bring the whole structure crashing down. And this is where our guy, W. Schmidt, enters the picture. He took Lang's discovery and ran with it, proposing something truly revolutionary. He basically said the reason the model doesn't work isn't because the facts are wrong, it's because you've been reading the timeline completely backwards.
And this slide, right here, shows you the whole mind-bending idea in a nutshell. On the left, you see the order in which the theories were invented by scholars. First animism, then polytheism, then monotheism. But on the right, that's the order of religion as it actually happened in history. It's the exact reverse. Monotheism came first. The story was literally upside down.
So what Schmidt argued, based on this new evidence, was that humanity's very first religion was actually a form of monotheism. Things like animism, polytheism, magic, they weren't the early simple steps on the way up. They were actually later developments, maybe even a kind of breakdown or a drift away from that original core belief in one God. Okay, so you have to be asking how.
How did so many smart people get it so spectacularly wrong for so long? Well, it really boiled down to two things: the methods they were using and the worldview they were using them with.
Let's break it down. The 19th century thinkers, they were operating with what we'd call a materialist method. They were inspired by Darwin, and they looked at cultures that didn't have writing and just assumed they were looking at a perfect snapshot of the Stone Age. They assumed simple meant old. But the new historical method, the one Schmidt and others used, was way more careful. It didn't just assume. It meticulously compared bits of culture, language, and stories across hundreds of groups to build a real timeline. And when they did that, what did they find? That belief in a high God was, ethnologically speaking, the oldest layer they could find.
So let's wrap our heads around this reversal. The old 19th century idea was that religion evolved from simple magic up to complex monotheism. And this whole idea was built on that assumption of progressivist evolutionism. But then Andrew Lang's discovery of high gods in these so-called primitive cultures just blew that model apart. The new theory flipped it on its head, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, an original monotheism came first. And the biggest lesson here, it just goes to show you how much our assumptions can totally shape our conclusions, and sometimes lead us completely down the wrong path.
You know, this whole story is just such a huge reminder. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other stories that we tell ourselves, these neat and tidy histories that we think are totally solved, what other ones are we telling completely backwards? What else are we sure we know that might just be waiting for that one little clue to turn it all upside down? It's something to think about. Thanks for digging into this with us.